Hello, I'm Young-tae Kim, Secretary General of the International Transport Forum. Today, I'm speaking about the future of urban mobility with Jamie Heywood, Regional Manager for Northern and Eastern Europe, including the UK at Uber. Since 2016, Uber has been a valued corporate partner who has worked with us on many topics. So I prepared 3 questions to Jamie, and now the question number 1. So Jamie, cities are the testing ground for many innovative and exciting forms of mobility, from ride-sharing to micromobility. In the wake of the pandemic, many cities also reallocated space from cars to pedestrians and cyclists. Urban deliveries also skyrocketed, adding to the competition for street space. In this situation, how do you see the future of mobility in cities developing?
It's great to be here. And thank you also for the support that you guys have provided us and the wider industry. In the short term, I mean, COVID's changed the way we work and the way we move around cities. So what we see is that private car usage is up and public transport usage is down, which is a really worrying trend, which maybe we can talk about later. But looking out longer term, I think there's some really big unknowns. And there's 2 I'd like to highlight. The first is the future of work, and the second is the future of retail. And in the end, transport is not a means to an end. It's a means to do something else, to go somewhere you want to be. And I think it's not yet clear how work is going to shape up and how hybrid working is going to shape up. And I think it's also not clear how city retail and urban retail is really going to develop. Are people still going to want to go to shops in the center of cities? Is that how retail is going to develop? And because of that, I think when we think about our transport network, we need to really try and work out what we do know, because there's a lot of big unknowns. And I think the things we do know is transport will need to be flexible to deal with the uncertainties and to deal with the innovations that will come to solve those uncertainties. I think it will need to be sustainable, and I think it will also need to be deeply efficient. So we have limited space in our cities, we have limited assets in our cities, we need to make sure it's efficient. So flexibility, I think, can be secured by offering people the widest range of options about how they move around the city and to let them choose. What had worked historically may not work in the future, and therefore we need to build flexibility into the way we think about urban transport. I think efficiency can be secured by promoting shared transport whenever possible. That's putting more individuals into vehicles, and that could be public transport, or it could be active transport as well, which is a very efficient way of using urban road space. And it needs to be sustainable, and I think we can secure decarbonization of transport by getting people out of their private cars and also by using micromobility. So we support all of those goals. For sustainability, we've made a commitment to be emission-free in London by 2025, in Europe by 2030, and globally by 2040. We're always trying to expand the new transport modes that we have on the app. So in London, where I am now, we have e-bikes, we have e-scooters, we have Uber Boat, and we've got the range of public transport integrated into the app, as well as UberX and our traditional ride-hailing products. So for us, the future has to be centered around shared and active transport, driven by customer choice and not around private cars.
Thank you for your explanation. My next question might be more difficult than the previous one, because we will talk about a big dilemma. So the car has dominated urban transport for 100 years, but many people wonder whether the automobile has a future in cities. But in fact, cars provide great mobility and flexibility, but only if not everyone uses them. If all do, congestion becomes endemic. Is there an answer to that fundamental dilemma?
I think the first thing I'd say is that the problem is not the car so much as the private car. And if I elaborate why, the reason why the private car is the problem is that it sits empty on average for 95% of the time, and it takes up approximately 15% of the urban land when it's parked for that 95% of the time. So, I think in a multimodal future where, cars definitely have a space, but they need to be electric so that you're reducing emissions, and they categorically need to be shared, and they need to be integrated in with other modes of shared transport like public transport, and also active transport like electric bikes and electric scooters. So I do think the car has a place, but only if it's well used and shared, and not if it's private. In terms of the second part to your question, which is around congestion and emissions, I think even if we are sharing our assets, and that means shared cars, shared buses, congestion is still going to be an issue we have to face into. And when I look at it, it's a very typical kind of public good problem. And so I think, however politically difficult it might be, the solution has to be to try and disincentivize or put a price on the use of public assets. And those public assets are things like roads, they're things like clean airs. And I think the best way to do that is through some form of dynamic, distance-based, time-based road pricing using GPS. And that way we can try and manage the public assets that are our urban infrastructure and our urban air in ways that, we recognize at Uber, because we use GPS and matching algorithms to try and make the best utilization of our fleets. I think we can use many of the same technologies to think about how we price road space and how we price urban air. And there's a lot of work we're doing there to make that data available to cities. But I think in the end, that's got to be the solution to the fundamental dilemma you posed, which is we make people pay in a way that causes them to take different decisions, and decisions that are better for all of us, even if there may be a slight cost to the individual.
Thank you. And my final question, the next critical round of climate negotiations will take place in Glasgow in this November, and transport emits about a quarter of all CO2 emissions, and it is still more than 90% dependent on oil. Then it's clear that all transport stakeholders must work hand in hand to decarbonize transport, because climate change cannot be stopped if we don't. In your view, what should be the division of labor between the public and private sector to make sure we really deliver net zero transport emissions together?
So the scale of the climate challenge is so big that it is going to require, as you say, all parties to work together. But if we kind of look at what the problem is, we need to jointly build an electric vehicle infrastructure ecosystem, which makes the economics of moving to an EV work, and particularly for high kilometer drivers who will be the first to move. And that means really two things. Firstly, reducing the upfront costs of an EV versus a petrol vehicle. And secondly, reducing the running costs of an EV versus a petrol vehicle. And that includes the opportunity costs of the time to charge. So if that's the problem we're trying to solve, I think the role of government is to use policy to tilt the playing field towards EVs. And that can be done in a number of ways, such as purchase subsidies, road taxes with exemptions for EVs to change the upfront cost, or to change the running costs. It's about improving EV infrastructure, such as the right to charge, which they have in Netherlands, and also potentially increasing petrol taxes to try and make petrol relatively more expensive than an EV. And also, governments have to remove some of the outdated rules that block drivers' EV switch, such as return to garage or vehicle obligations. So I think that's what governments have to do, which is create the playing fields and define the policies allow private sector to then come in and fill the gaps. And at Uber, we're absolutely committed to playing our role in that. And if I talk about some of the stuff we've done, we've introduced clean air plans to help drivers switch to EVs. In London, where we've pledged that every single vehicle will be an EV by 2025, we've raised over 140 million pounds to support drivers in that switch. And that money is individual to the driver. So as they drive, they're accruing money into their own personal EV savings account that they can then redeem when they switch. And so far, it's helped nearly 2,000 drivers switch to an EV in London. We've also introduced Uber Green. So we have a dedicated service where in London, we now have more than 3,000 EVs that are available to the rider at the same cost as an UberX. So there's no penalty for the rider, and they get the benefit of a zero emissions trip. And the other thing we've done with respect to electric vehicle infrastructure, because the big reason why drivers say they don't want to switch is they worry about charging, is we're investing more than £5 million working with local councils in London to put chargers near where drivers live. And so we're sharing the data we have, and we're hoping that actually the public-private partnership that we've started with some of the London boroughs will serve as a role model for how we can then start to extend that public-private partnership into other areas and other countries. So, I think certainly government has a role, and then the private sector both have a role. And I think what you've seen from the work that we've done at Uber is where the policy conditions are right, we're absolutely willing to lean in to try and make sure that drivers make the right choice and can move to an EV as quickly and easily as possible.
Thank you very much for your insightful responses. Thank you for being with us today.
You're very, very welcome. It was my honor.